And with that, I'd like to first share what we'll actually be discussing in today's webinar. So of course, we want to start by introducing ourselves and our panelists to all of you. Then we will discuss why we feel the session is important, the past, present, and future state of travel, domestic and virtual program opportunities offered through the UC, how to fund study away, and we will finish by having our panelists share their study away journeys and opening up the floor to Q&A. So without further ado, I've been talking a lot already, so I guess it's time to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Bayman. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I'm a study abroad program coordinator and advisor at UC Santa Cruz. I just really, truly feel grateful to share this space with all of you due to my own personal experiences with the undocumented community. I guess just to give you guys a little backstory, after graduating from high school, I had no intention to pursue higher education. I was 18 years old and worked as a third shift server at a mom and pop's restaurant in Indiana. But it was there that I befriended a coworker who was 16 and had just arrived in the States in search of work from Mexico. And really this friendship kind of changed the course of my life as she began to, teach me about Mexican culture, from the language to the music to the food to her own struggles living here without legal papers. She actually eventually influenced me to go to college, where I then majored in Spanish and Latin American and Latino studies. I continued to work as a waitress throughout my college tenure, where I met some of the closest people in my life, many of whom identify as undocumented. So, the undocumented community has had a profound impact on my own life trajectory, and I'm grateful to be in this discussion with you all today. Mauricio.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mauricio Cobian, pronouns he, him, his. I'm one of the associate directors for the UCLA Study Abroad office. I am a double Bruin, which means I did my French undergrad at UCLA, and I've also completed my master's in student affairs at UCLA. I identify as formerly undocumented all throughout my undergrad. I identified as undocumented. I was very lucky that the stars aligned for me and I was able to resolve something for myself. But I know the struggle, and that personal experience is one of the things that has sort of motivated me to support and provide resources to our undocumented students on campus. So I'm really, really excited to be able to present this information to our community. And I'll pass it off to Habiba.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. My name is Habiba Sinji, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm actually a staff attorney with the UC Immigrant Legal Services Center. The UC Immigrant Legal Services Center, which we'll talk about later, serves all the UC campuses, but I have the great privilege of being assigned specifically to serve UCLA students and their family members. I've been doing this work for about 6 years now, first as an undocumented student program coordinator at UC Santa Barbara, and then getting folded into the UC Immigrant Legal Services Center program more broadly. So I have very much enjoyed working with the undocumented student community, the fierce advocates, and their family members for the legal services.
Thank you, Habiba. And now I'll invite our panelists to introduce themselves.
I majored in anthropology with a minor in education, and the programs that I was able to participate in, which we'll talk about a little bit later, were the sociology in NYC summer 2018 and also UCDC fall 2018. I really enjoyed my East Coast experiences so much that after graduation, I actually moved over here, and I'm currently working in a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. So I'm really excited to share any tips and advice that I have on that and my experiences so far.
I participated in the study abroad program and went to Thailand for a few months, and I absolutely loved it. And I'm really excited to share more about my experience because it was definitely the most rewarding and memorable college experience that has definitely impacted my personal and professional endeavors thus far. I currently work for the Department of Education here in Orange County with incarcerated youth. So if you are interested in learning more about that, I'm all ears.
And the program that I did was an education program in Hawaii. So I spent about 5 weeks there, actually just last summer.
Thank you all so much, and I truly can't wait to hear from you all later. So here we have some critical points as to why we wanted to engage in community discussion through this session. So first, since advanced parole for educational purposes was suspended in 2017, study abroad is not a realistic option for undocumented folks. So really our intent is to highlight study abroad alternatives, including domestic and virtual programs. We also feel it's important to outline travel policies impacting undocumented students. We want to highlight different resources available to the undocumented community. And most importantly, we want to offer insight into the undocumented student experience on study away programs via our returning panelists. Mauricio, you can take it away.
But certainly before we continue, we got to address the elephant in the room here, right? But what about COVID-19? Yeah, I mean, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on study away, opportunities that let you travel and move around, outside of your UC campus. What we want to share just a brief points on this. Essentially, the UC programs are closely monitoring the evolving global, coronavirus. We're using travel warnings and advisories from the U.S. Department of State and the CDC, as well as guidance and directives from the UC Office of the President. So we're using a combined number of resources to sort of determine, whether programs can still run, how will they be modified, if we need to suspend a program at the last minute. Or if the programs that we don't personally manage, but we're going to be sharing with you if they need to make those decisions. The other thing we want to highlight is that some of these traditional in-person programs have moved to a virtual remote learning environment. So we also want to showcase that these opportunities are even more accessible, for our community. So we want to highlight, the past, the present, and future state of travel for undocumented students. I'll touch a little bit on the past. As Ashley has already shared, pre-2017, undocumented students had a mechanism to study abroad. There were certain conditions that students needed to meet, and I won't go into the details of it because that requires a totally different session, but essentially students needed to have DACA, they needed to be granted advanced parole for educational purposes, and they needed to meet admissibility, being able to be let back into the country. And even when students were going through this process, legal consultation was strongly encouraged. We wanted to make sure that students weren't making a mistake along the process that put their status or their ability to be in this country in jeopardy. For a lot of our students, even though that there was a mechanism for this, there were stressors. There were no guarantees on whether students would be able to get back into the country. But generally, we were very successful with the students that we work with across the UC system. One of the things that led to these stresses was, regarding the admissibility, the department that granted advanced parole wasn't necessarily the same sort of talking to the same department that, allowed students, to come back in. So there was definitely stresses for our students, but from 2015 to 2016, dozens of impacted UC students studied abroad and returned safely. But things have changed, and now I'm going to pass it off to Habiba to tell us essentially what is the present state of international travel at this time.
Great, thank you, Mauricio. So I'm going to actually start with what's happened over the last few months when it comes to DACA and DACA renewal as the basis for requesting advanced parole. So as many folks may have heard, in June, we saw a very hopeful decision coming out of the Supreme Court allowing for DACAs to move forward in a way that overturned the rescission from September 5th, 2017. So if we go farther back into our memories, as you may remember, early in the Trump administration, the DACA program was rescinded. Again, this was on September 5th, 2017. Meaning that no new DACA applications were being accepted. And at that time, DACA renewals were even being halted after a certain grace period, and advanced parole was taken off the table. So, there was a bunch of steps of litigation in between where we are now. But when the case finally got to the Supreme Court, we had a pleasant surprise to see that the justices, the majority, decided that, actually, the government's reasoning behind the rescission and how it was carried out, importantly, was faulty. And so the DACA program should be allowed to continue in full. However, we didn't see an implementation of that decision. In fact, any new DACA applications that were submitted to USCIS following the Supreme Court decision were held and then rejected and sent back to the applicant. And instead, what we saw was a memo that was released at the end of July by the Department of Homeland Security and implemented by USCIS. So I put the link in the slide. And this memo was critical in that it not only sort of flouted the decision of the Supreme Court, but was sort of like a new rescission light memo in that a number of limitations were put back onto DACA, again, despite the Supreme Court decision. So some foundational points is, for DACA initial applications, which so many people were waiting for to be able to, apply into the DACA program. Unfortunately, they're still refusing to take initial DACA applications. With DACA renewals, we saw a surprising limitation of DACA renewals. So now anyone who renews their DACA past August or has renewed their DACA past August 24th or plans to as of right now will only be seeing a 1-year DACA grant and work permit accompanying that DACA grant. So that's where we're at with DACA and DACA renewal. So now moving on to what that memo says about advanced parole, I'm going to do something that I rarely do, which is read directly off the memo because it is so specific about advanced paroles. So advanced parole was not fully taken off the table in the same way that the September 5th, 2017 rescission memo announced. However, it's severely limited. So like I said, I'm going to read directly from the memo. So while the determination of whether to grant advanced parole to a DACA recipient based on exceptional circumstances is a case-by-case assessment involving assessment of the totality of factors presented, some of the examples of travel that may fit within the statutory standard for parole include, but are not limited to the following. So I do want to note that I kind of skipped ahead so I wouldn't have to read too much out loud. The caveat to advanced parole right now is that must be based on exceptional circumstances. So what I'm going to highlight from the what I'm going to highlight regarding exceptional circumstances are factors that are kind of examples that USCIS or DHS is offering. So for example, travel to support the national security interests of the US, including US military interests, travel in furtherance of US federal law enforcement interests, travel to obtain life-sustaining medical treatment that is not otherwise available to the immigrant in the US. Travel needed to support the immediate safety, well-being, or care of an immediate relative. And immediate here is italicized, particularly minor children of the immigrant. And so, again, I read these out loud because it's so specific that I pull up this memo every time I get consultation questions from students and family members that we serve regarding advanced parole to give them an exact set of examples of what DHS is currently saying are ways that you can show exceptional circumstances for advanced parole. So, I think different organizations have differed in their opinions about who who can or can't apply for advanced parole at this time, whether it's a good idea. One of our colleague organizations, the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, has very clearly stated that they think it's high risk to apply for advanced parole at this time. Okay, so transitioning to domestic travel, the main thing that I want to highlight is that there were a lot of questions around the Real ID and how to travel, with the form of identification that we may currently have. So the Real ID Act basically is an implementation of many years of a larger body of laws that were post 9/11. And so the Real ID Act is just sort of the step involving the identification that would be recognized by the federal government. And so all states have been required to become Real ID compliant. So those of you who have gotten a Real ID California driver's license, you'll notice that it looks different from the old ID. And there was a bit of a rush to go get these IDs before October of this year, so that deadline has already passed. But because of COVID and all the restrictions, when the shutdowns first started happening, there was an announcement that the implementation of the Real ID in California would be suspended, and the deadline, would be moved to next year. So for those who are concerned about getting their Real ID California driver's license, you have until October 1st of next year. So hopefully, we'll see some changes by then, and it'll be safe to get that Real ID driver's license, which is available to anyone who has DACA or some sort of lawful status that enables them to get a Real ID. I am going to talk about our services in a moment. So if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me individually with your questions. Regarding, risks of domestic travel. So actually kind of finishing off the point about identification, because this goes back into the risks of domestic travel. Folks who are undocumented with no form of protection will generally be unable to access a Real ID compliant form of identification in the form of a California driver's license or California ID. And so in order to travel domestically, they would have to use a passport from their country of origin or a consular ID card. Those are considered valid travel documents by TSA if they're issued by the country that the person is a citizen of. However, the concern that comes up is when you're traveling through airports, those are places where there's CBP, Customs and Border Protection activity. And so presenting your passport from a foreign country, which may not contain, a visa, like a current visa showing you're lawfully present here, or showing a consular ID card, these forms of IDs may have the effect of flagging you. I will say that this is something that we tell everyone so that they're fair warned, but I have not had any students of mine, at least or any of their family members, who've reached out and told me that, this has led to being detained or worse, being deportation proceedings. That's not to say that, the risk isn't there. It's just in the sample size that I, have interfaced with that hasn't come up. So I try to give people a sense of, risk analysis. I highly recommend, before anyone considers traveling even domestically, to please check out these fantastic ACLU resources. I put the links in the slide. However, I found them just by Googling, because we have the PDFs in our folders. But if you just Google these keywords, ACLU and then Know Your Rights Border Zone, Know Your Rights Enforcement at the Airport, they should take you directly to these links. They're very helpful, and I strongly suggest to anyone who's considering traveling to please read those. I send them to everyone who I do a consult with who talks about traveling domestically. Okay, So, I don't know what the future holds, and none of us do. So the question mark is so important on this slide. But, we're very, of course, hopeful that things will change. So much rides on what happens after November 3rd. And so, if we see a Biden administration, hopefully we'll see a rollback of so many of these restrictions that I just talked about. If we see another Trump administration, we may see increases in enforcement, just more difficult scenarios to deal with. So please, stay posted, keep in touch with us so that we can properly advise you in real time. Next slide, please. So I'll finish my section by giving the information as promised about the UC Immigrant Legal Services Center. So we serve the immigration-related legal needs, so specifically working on direct representation and assistance in immigration cases for undocumented and mixed status students and their immediate family members in the UC system. And just to kind of clarify mixed status, that means so students who are not undocumented themselves, so this could mean US citizen students, people who were born here, people who have lawful permanent residence, but their immediate family members, so spouse, children, parents, siblings, who identify as undocumented, we provide services on a family basis for those families. So if you have any questions about our services, please do reach out. While I say that we serve the UC system, we serve 9 out of the 10 UC campuses, and that's because UC Berkeley, my alma mater for law school, has its own legal services partnership pre-existing us with the East Bay Community Law Center. So you'll notice there's a link for students who are coming from Berkeley versus students coming from the rest of the UC system who we do serve. And then, if you have questions that are non-legal related, but you want to learn more about the services provided at your campus, you can check out the information about undocumented student services or undocumented student program, AB 540, centers by campus using the link provided in this slide.
So now we're going to showcase a very introductory overview of some of the program opportunities that are available to our undocumented students. In each individual program slide that you'll see next, you'll see a very short link. We're going to share the presentation with you afterwards. So if you want to go into more detail, we do encourage to explore those programs, visiting those links. So first, I'll start off with our UC system programs. We have the UC Center Sacramento. This is a program at our state's capital with a focus on California public policy and an internship experience in Sacramento. They offer it pretty much year-round. When it comes to documentation, it's important to know that students would need a government-issued ID and that some of the internships may require an EAD or social security number. This is typically an in-person internship and coursework, but because of COVID-19, they have transitioned into a temporarily virtual environment. So you can still do this program through remote, learning. UCDC, we have students here that participated on that program. This has also transitioned. It's typically an in-person program, at a nation's capital with an internship as its cornerstone, of the program. It's also transitioned to a temporarily virtual environment. Similarly, you would need a government issued ID, and some of the internships do require some of these work authorization or social security number requirements. For those interested in ecology and biology, there is a California Ecology and Conservation Program. This is where you can conduct independent research and field work visiting 5 to 7 natural reserves across California. You start off in San Jose, you might end up in Yosemite, all the way to our coast. There's no special documentation outside of that a student would need outside of whatever normal documentation you would need as a UC student. transitioning to programs that are offered by specific UC campuses that unless we actually mention it, that it's open to any UC student. UCLA Travel Study, they're offering in-person and virtual offerings. The in-person programs, we have a program in sociology in New York City, also one in global studies, and an Asian American studies program in Guam. There is also a virtual offering that focuses on business leadership and communication across Asia. These are experiential courses that you're taking with UCLA professors. And in terms of documentation, you would primarily need, and just as Habiba has shared, need documentation for any domestic air travel involved. UC Riverside has their own version of this. They have an anthropology program in the US Virgin Islands, a biology program in California, and a dance program in New York City. They also have a virtual program that focuses on business in Scotland. As for this program, you're spending the summer traveling and learning alongside your UC peers in UC Riverside professor-taught courses. When it comes to documentation, simply for anything that would require domestic air travel. UC San Diego has global seminars. This year, they're offering a program called Detours in Hawaii and a program on global and environmental history in New York City. These are 5-week-long summer study away experiences led by UC San Diego professors. And when it comes to documentation, simply anything for domestic air travel. UC Santa Cruz has domestic exchanges. These are in person, and they are at the University of New Hampshire and at the University of New Mexico. These are undergraduate programs that allow Santa Cruz students to study at other top institutions in the US. So again, this is a program that would be exclusive to, you would have to be a currently enrolled student at UC Santa Cruz. It's available as a fall option, as a spring option, and as a year-long opportunity. When it comes to documentation, it would be documentation that you would need for domestic air travel. And now here's a list of opportunities that offer internship offerings. Berkeley Global Internships, this year they're offering them temporarily virtual because of the current situation we find ourselves in. But at any other years, there would be internship opportunities that are available in Atlanta, Boston, Detroit, Los Angeles, New York City, Puerto Rico, San Francisco, and they do offer international opportunities as well. But I wanted to highlight the domestic ones. These are project-based virtual academic internships in a variety of industries. When it comes to documentation, for those that are in person, again, anything for domestic air travel. And if there are Berkeley AB 540 students, they do have a special scholarship opportunities for students who are Berkeley students. Davis has their own version of this. They have an in-person one in Hawaii, as well as that focuses on education, as well as a global policy program in Washington, DC. They also have a range of virtual programs that are worldwide, affiliated with international organizations. Here you can earn credit while you gain cross-cultural and professional work experience in diverse fields. When it comes to documentation, simply anything for domestic travel. And finally, UCAP, which is normally known for their study abroad programs, they do have a virtual internship this year where you can develop multicultural communication skills and get valuable work experience while you build a global professional network. Because these are virtual, there is no special documentation required. So these are just a series of the programs that are accessible to undocumented students within the UC system. When it comes to funding study away, we're not typically in a presentation, we might go into the details of costs. Today we won't, and that's because we're representing programs that we don't personally work with. So we recommend simply connecting with those specific programs to learn more about sort of what the costs involved. But we do want to highlight typically how costs are outlined in these programs. Some of these programs may be more expensive than just being here on your specific campus. Some of them might be about the same, and some of them might actually be less expensive. It really depends on the opportunity. But what we want to highlight is when you're looking at the budget, the cost for these programs, they would typically include the tuition and program fees, your housing, meals, your transportation, health insurance, and day-to-day expenses that are involved with that specific program. The budgets are generally not going to include any personal travel you do on the weekends to I don't know where. It's not going to include souvenirs or personal entertainment. On the other hand, if there is an excursion that's part of that program, typically that would also be included as part of the budget. Students can use their UC financial aid, eligible students can use their UC financial aid on study away opportunities. Often they can carry their Cal Grant for these opportunities, except for summer. That applies to all students who receive a Cal Grant. And we were consulting with a few different UC campuses, and some campuses do have specific opportunities for undocumented students, special funds. We didn't go into the details of this because there's a lot of nuances that we don't want to misrepresent. So we primarily encourage students to connect with their campus financial aid office to see what specific institutional or university grant aid is available specifically for undocumented students. For these study away programs, generally students could take advantage of the grant California Dream Loan if they wanted to. And we're providing some top level information, but to really get into the details of this, do connect with your campus financial aid office. And scholarships. Scholarships are available, even though it's actually point number 3 here. I want to start with this. Something that's important to know about scholarships, even for folks that that don't identify as undocumented, is that scholarship opportunities often do not cover the full budget of the program. Scholarships is a way to chip away at those costs and minimize, for example, the need to take out one of the loans. We're representing study abroad offices, but some of these programs are not study abroad. Connect with your study abroad office though. They might be able to provide a series of scholarship funds that are available specific to you for your specific campus. Otherwise, connect with the respective program that we've highlighted today. As I shared, some campuses do have campus-specific scholarships for undocumented students. In addition, here are just some specific opportunities you can also explore: the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, MALDEF, Branson Travel Office Local Adventure Scholarships. That's a very unique opportunity that is a little bit more, that's tied to travel. And Diversity Abroad has a special ambassador program that undocumented students are able to access. And now, enough of me talking. I want to pass it off to the more exciting component. Well, not that I'll stop talking. Let's move on to our student returnee panel.
Yeah, so as Mauricio mentioned, really the heart of this discussion today is learning about the experiences of our panelists who participated in study away programs. So just so you guys kind of understand how this is going to work, each panelist is going to share how they chose their program, as well as any challenges and successes they experienced. After each panelist has spoken, we will then ask all panelists how they funded their program and to share one memorable experience from their program. And then we will facilitate a live Q&A where you can either ask all panelists a question or ask a specific panelist a question.
Alrighty, thank you everybody for that information. I'm very, very thankful for each and every one of you for putting this together. You're putting together so many resources and really saving students some of the time. For example, when I was undergoing this process, I felt like I had to pull so many different sources of information together and see what would fit my specific scenario. And I think resources such as this really take a lot of that time because as Habiba was mentioning, a lot of these things are very, very specific to your situation. And for me, for example, I started my research and my interest in studying abroad internationally. At the time, I wasn't sure where. I just knew I wanted to get out of here and, see the world and see how different the world could be from what I had experienced growing up in Southern California and moving up to Santa Cruz for school. And I started doing this in early 2016. So I actually had applied to a study away program for Mexico. I was set, I was ready to go. I was starting to really plan my finances, and then the election happened. So, I definitely share some of the frustrations some folks might have with everything that's going on, because I had to drop my program and I had to cancel my plans and, my class schedule was just all out of whack. So, but I was still very determined to, experience the world. And I figured, hey, the rest of the United States is still part of the world. And judging from how different Santa Cruz is to San Diego, where I grew up, I know that difference can be very, very great, even within the same country. So that kind of inspired me a little bit. And I started looking at my options. There was a few options. There was the Sacramento and the UCDC. But New York really caught my eye. I figured, hey, that's all the way on the other side of the country. Let's give it a shot. And the program really spoke to me. I was very interested in finding out how, coming from a family of day laborers, my family builds streets, we build buildings, we ironically take a physical role in a lot of the gentrification my city is going through. And I know that's the case with a lot of major cities, including New York City. So I really wanted to get a national perspective on the immigrant worker experience, especially those contracted by different facets of the city. So I felt that the curriculum really aligned with just not only my research interests, but my personal interests. So I applied, and it was through the UCLA Summer Travel Study Program. And well, I guess that kind of answers how I chose the New York program. And to talk a little bit about the UCDC program. So I actually participated in the New York summer 2018, and then that fall 2018, I went over to UCDC. So the application process was actually around the same time. And I just was very motivated. I was just applying to all these scholarships, all these programs. And, when you're on a roll, you just kind of say, hey, let's just do it. Let's apply, see what happens. And I also felt that even though I wasn't, a politics major or political science major, I still felt that politics, my life is just intertwined with politics, and where better to learn about the national, immigrant and undocumented experience than UCDC. So that's kind of where I was able to merge my experience with these two programs. And I really liked, speaking to people who had done the UCDC. That one was definitely more popular among, my circle. So I felt that people generally had a pretty good experience, and it was just as much of a learning experience. So I applied to both, and I was able to get into both. So I did them basically back to back. I only had about 1 week of break in between. So I was just kind of in the East Coast for about 6 months. And to answer the second question, I'll talk a little bit more about how it went, in the specific experience of being undocumented, which kind of ties into the second question, which were the primary challenges. And first and foremost, I would say beyond, fear of something happening, related to my status or even safety-wise, financial burdens definitely kind of, kind of drowned out everything else. It was one of those things that I wasn't sure if I was gonna get a refund that quarter or that summer semester, or how much it was gonna be, just because everybody's situation is very different. But this was more so for the UCDC program. For the UCLA program, I was very, very lucky to have applied and received the Summer Travel Study Scholarship Program. So there's 2 recipients. I'm not sure if it's per program or for the entire Summer Travel Study Program in general, but I was asked to create a creative blog that highlights my experience and something that other interested students can look into. So I took a lot of photos. I wrote very detailed blogs about my experience with the classes, and just kind of life as a UC student in New York. And I also drew caricatures that kind of highlight the experience. So it was a very artistic project. It was a lot of fun. And it funded the program, which I was very, very fortunate. The only thing I had to put in was The only things not included were my personal travel and, as you mentioned, souvenirs and things like that. But for DC, it was different. I didn't have a scholarship like that. So it was just kind of savings. And I actually relied on some income as a dog walker. But in retrospect, I think I underestimated how, the crime rates of different cities. I always, did my best to stick with numbers with at least one other buddy. But, that's one thing that in retrospect, I don't think it was the safest thing. And especially right now, just so much going on. I would have prioritized saving and budgeting a lot more to not have to put myself out there as a newbie to the city. And, just any big city, anywhere really, being a single person, regardless of gender or background, is just, being a new person in a city is often just a risk in itself. So, just as a mental note, I really took that lesson everywhere. But aside from financial challenges, I felt that aligning my classes was a little bit tricky. So I would recommend, whether you're first year, even if it's, your first year at UC, definitely start planning as early as possible. Sometimes, classes can overlap, like especially with your general eds, overlap and kind of see if any classes during that program would count towards your general ed so that you don't double as much as possible. Towards the end, it was a little bit of a crunch because I went to DC in my fourth year, or my fifth year. So kind of wrapping up was a little bit of a crunch. So that was, that stress I carried during the quarter itself. So definitely plan ahead. And to mention one more challenge, I would say that just kind of just in general culture shock. I did not expect the East Coast to be so cold. Now I've acclimated. I've been here for 1 year. So I've gone through a whole winter and a whole summer, and the summers are very, very humid out here and the winters are very cold. So definitely plan into your budget any outfit differences. So, I had to dress up a lot better for my internship. I had to dress up in a more professional way. So my budget for my clothing was actually way off. I would have allocated a few more $100 towards that. Just because I didn't, I just feel Santa Cruz is a little on the casual side. So I just didn't have a lot of slacks and blazers and things like that. But that was just kind of my other challenge. And to summarize for the last question, what were some of the professional successes you experienced after your program? I think that the academic, professional, and personal growth were exponential. I don't regret my programs. I'm still sad I was not able to study outside of the country, but I still feel that, these were just such unique experiences and very, very different. But also I was shocked to see at the similarities that I found to my normal life in California at the time. So I think I count those as successes because I would not have had those types of growth without these programs. I really learned that, to step outside of my bubble, that even though I was very familiar with California policies, for example, relating to my status, not every state shares those policies or those leeways. For example, I am able to get a driver's license in DC, but not Maryland, or DC and Maryland, but not Virginia. And those states are basically right next to each other. You can drive to one or the other within 20, 30 minutes. And just, how strikingly different laws can change from one state to the next. I think those were very big lessons that living it personally was very much more impactful than memorizing, oh, these states I can get a license and these states I can't. It became something that I was much more personally conscious of. And just, seeing how gentrification and just different types of issues in the world can affect different people very, very differently. You know, the history is very, very different in each state. And, you know, to live it personally, it was very, very impactful. So I'm very thankful for those professional, academic, and personal successes.
Yeah, I went to Hawaii last summer, 2019. I honestly, I feel like it was kind of like on the spot. I got an email. I remember I was at work and I just got like an email from like, I think it was like EOP, and it was like promoting the program, which was education in Hawaii. And I just told myself, I was like, I want to do it and I'm gonna do it. So I think I remember my timeline was very like, I got the email like in January. I started doing my research. And yeah, I think I have always been, I've always known that I've wanted to pursue like a career with education, whether that be like teaching or like advising. So going to Hawaii and doing a internship in a middle school. I did an internship at a middle school for 5 weeks, and I was placed in like a low income minority, like most minority students school. And yeah, I think it was just a good experience because that solidified more of like what I want to do in my own future and career wise with like the education field. As an educator, I feel like it's important to like know just outside of your own experiences. So going to Hawaii and being able to immerse in a totally different culture, totally different environment, um, where I was able to experience an education setting outside of California, outside of outside of California primarily, was completely different. And yeah, again, it solidified my pathway towards like pursuing a career in the education field. Um, and yeah, and then primary challenges. Um, Again, like Tanya was saying too, like finances are a huge thing. Um, ever since I saw that email and I kind of put the work that I wanted to do for like the application process and going to financial aid and all of those processes, I was able to start saving up my own money. So that helped me out. And then financial aid did support me as well. But I think primary challenges was that finances. And if I could go back, I think I would also budget better and budget more, because Hawaii is actually kind of really expensive. And it's not that easy to get around by like public transportation and stuff. So yeah, I think that was one of my biggest challenges. I think something else that I can recall was like being really, really, really homesick. Just because, yes, like it's Hawaii and like there's everything and anything to do, but also culturally it's very different, of course. So like not being able to um, easily like do like a food run to like, I don't know, like a taco shop or something. I know it sounds so like, wow, like basic needs, you know? But it's just little things like that. The space that we were in, we were located in like a university housing. We didn't have like a kitchen or kitchen access like that. So it was really hard to just maintain that kind of like energy when there was like no familiarity. Um, yeah, there was so much there was no familiarity with like what was going around, or what there was no home feeling, if that makes sense. But it was also sorry, I'm blanking a little bit, but I think overall it was also really important for myself to acknowledge that you know, Hawaii is like it was, it's not my own home, and it is US territory as well. And there's a lot of politics and a lot of just a lot of stuff going around on in Hawaii. So I think also for me, it was really important to know before I went that where I stand as a non-Hawaiian native. So that was also a really big takeaway for me, and just something that I made sure to always acknowledge when I was there. I touched a little bit already on like my academic successes and stuff, and so yeah, I just appreciate my experience and being a sort of educator while being out there, and yeah, it's just again a solidifier to like me and my career paths and my future career. Yeah.
I just want to say that I feel, after hearing everyone speak, I really feel very fortunate to have had the experience to travel abroad before, 2020 and before the elections. I believe I was one of the last cohort of students from UCLA who went overseas, and how I ended up making my decision to study abroad was almost unintentionally, I think. So as an undergraduate, I was very much involved, and I had a lot of friends who were undocumented, and so I would constantly try to keep myself up to date with, like the laws and anything that was, important to know about being undocumented at the time. And I remember I attended it was some sort of like workshop where a presenter mentioned that he was undocumented and that he traveled abroad. And that just really resonated with me, because growing up, I knew from the get-go that I was undocumented and that traveling was never going to really be an option for me, even though I did have that desire. That was one of those things that I feel like I really wanted to do when I was in college, but of course, I didn't have the financial resources, and there was legal obstacles involved. So after hearing this presenter speak, I remember going to the study abroad program, and that's where I met Mauricio. And I was like, hey, I'm really interested in studying abroad. Like, what do I need to do? And again, I think it talk about perfect timing, because um, you know, the legal advice and just like even the emotional support that I received to make this big decision actually happen was by far one of the most, like, it is something that to this day I am so grateful, and I love to share with like the students that I work with my coworkers, with anybody that I really get the opportunity with. And so part of it was because, one, again, there was that fear, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen if I actually make this trip happen. There is that risk that I might not be able to enter, right? And of course, financially, like my parents couldn't help me. So I was like, where am I going to get the money from? So the way that I chose the program was, what program is the cheapest? That was really my my selection. I was like, what program is the cheapest, to the point where I can afford it, because my parents cannot help me financially. And also, are there any scholarships? Am I going to get credit for any classes that I take for my program? And so initially, I wanted to travel to Ghana. But after speaking to our legal advisor at the time, I guess there was, I'm not sure if things have changed, but there was like tensions between the US and Ghana. So she suggested to choose a different country. So my roommate at the time had mentioned that she was also undocumented, and she was like, I'm gonna go to Thailand, you should look into it. It's cheap and they have a good relationship with the US. So after I spoke to the lawyer who was helping me at school, I decided to go with Thailand. And I was very fortunate that I was able to get the Dream Loan. And I believe I got a scholarship as well. And my mentor at the time she helped me with the flight ticket because that was by far the most expensive item of the trip. I believe it was like 1,000, and I think when I was an undergrad, I probably had like 100 in my savings. I don't remember. It was just, it was a blessing to say the least. So of course, like before I left the country, I went to, I visited Mauricio several times. I went to practice like some questions that, you know, I could possibly be asked coming, you know, back to the States. Same, I met with the lawyer several times too, just to make sure that all my paperwork was pretty much on check. And on that note, some of the challenges that came along with studying abroad was definitely just feeling anxious. For some good chunk of the trip, I actually carried, along with my roommate who was also undocumented, we both carry all of our documents, legal documents, everywhere we went. Even when we went to some of the islands in Thailand, we had our legal documents because, you know, it was just always in the back of our head, like, we're here because we have advanced parole, but that doesn't mean like much, right? Because we don't have U.S. citizenship, and again, we're just out here taking this big risk. But it definitely paid off, especially when we were coming back. Because we had 2 entry points, both in China and in the US. And I think our first, and like, I guess, check-in in China was probably the most challenging because they didn't know what the document meant. And so they had to like call and verify that we were, you know, we were telling the truth and that it was a valid document. And so by the time we came back to the States, our entry was very, very smooth. And so I have to give credit to everyone at UCLA who really like just helped us prepare and feel confident. I think I was a little bit more relaxed at that point, whereas my mom, I think she almost had a heart attack. I don't know, because the waiting time was I think we waited for like 2 hours to come back in. Other than that, I think one of the things that came out of the program was definitely just gaining confidence to be more independent, to travel, to say, you know what, like, I can do this. And so when I came back, I did more domestic traveling. So I went to different states, and it really just inspired me to just continue to learn more about different cultures, different beliefs, because being in Thailand is very, very different than being here in the US, mainly because I didn't realize how privileged I was, even as an undocumented student here in the US, until I was a student in Thailand. I remember that even when we mentioned like that we were from the US, a lot of the students thought that, you know, like they just told us how like lucky we were, because we had like the resources, we had the opportunity to pursue higher education, whereas many of our classmates in Thailand, you know, had to like their parents sacrificed a lot, or they were just, you know, inherently financially okay to afford going to college. The same thing with like seeing a lot of poverty. Even though I personally grew up, you know, poor, I guess, I always felt like there's always going to be a way for us to like improve our lives. But when I was in Thailand, it was different. There's a lot of like class discrimination. And so even like race discrimination, which I did face at one point, but it was okay. It was part of the learning experience, to be honest. And so that just made me more mindful about how I treat and view people, and how it's always important to keep an open mind, even though you might not know nothing about the other person. Just be mindful that there's always that learning opportunity there. Let's see. Yeah, I think Hopefully I touched on most of these questions.
One kind of main takeaway I got from all of you when talking about your successes is just how empowering it is to move your body, yourself across unknown terrain, to just kind of take that leap of faith. And having done that, like you guys, a huge success is that you are now an example to so many students who may, before even this presentation, thought that this is not an opportunity accessible to them, but they see you and they hear your stories. And so your guys' experiences and your guys' stories are invaluable, you know, not only to us, to Mauricio and I, Habiba, but to all the staff and faculty and students who have the opportunity to hear it. So I really can't thank you all enough, truly, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much. I know we are past time now. I did want to open it up for Q&A. A question we were going to ask is how, you know, you guys were able to fund your program, but I think most of you talked about that when you talked about the challenges. But I really want to give our attendees a chance to ask questions if they have any of you all. Habiba did have to leave, but we will send out these presentation slides that have their contact information. So if any students or staff have any specific questions for Habiba, you will have her information as soon as we send out the slides. But now I want to open it up to our attendees if you have any questions for our panelists. What will you say to your counterparts in your respective programs who would like to study in the United States? And this is a question for all panelists.
I can just imagine that the sort of culture shock that I experienced might be the same, but for different reasons. For me, it was how fast-paced it was and how many big buildings there were. And I guess maybe just the opposite for California. I feel like in general, you know, of course, there's the Bay Area in like those very central cities like LA, but in general, I feel like California is much more slower pace. It has like a surface level casual feel, like whether that's in clothing or just, you know, being able to walk to, you know, your bread shop, your panaderia before work, just for a quick stop or a quick snack, a quick ice cream. I felt like in the East Coast, just in general, it was just kind of like, okay, quick coffee to go and boom, straight to work. And I think that was my biggest difference, on top of the weather. So for the weather, one thing that I find refreshing about the East Coast is I get a reminder every 3 months that time is passing by. Like, okay, summer's over, you know, just mental reset, here we go, start fall off strong. And I also do very much enjoy California weather, but I think you get a much more prolonged summer or spring, for example. You don't really get a fall or a winter. Like right now we have the beautiful gold, yellow, red leaves over here. But if you're someone that really enjoys the summer or even that kind of cool spring, rainy weather, and of course, Northern and Southern California can be very different weather, but in general, there's no, you know, everything feels more prolonged. So I think that can be different in the long term because you're like, okay, fall, I'm ready for fall, I'm ready for hoodie season, and it just kind of never comes, you know, so you have to mentally, you know, rely on your calendars and planners a little bit more, I feel.
Sure. So again, I did not get a chance to travel outside of California, meaning like to a different state. However, after graduation, and after I came back from Thailand, I definitely made sure to do so. And if you have the opportunity to just leave your bubble, whether that's Southern California, Northern California, do it because you definitely always come back learning something new. And it's always something that I've learned is to always, you know, get out of your comfort zone. Because even like, for example, currently I live in Orange County, but 2 hours away from here is a different town that is very, very, again, it's completely different from where I currently live, and it's only 2 hours away. But again, I would say don't limit yourself to just the area that you live in. definitely branch out. You'll find that you start learning more about yourself, and you start realizing that you have more interests, you have specific likes and dislikes. So I always see it as a learning experience.
Yeah, I just a little bit. I kind of was thinking, kind of opposite to Tanya. In Hawaii, it's always like hot and sunny. Obviously, it's like a whole island. So I think yeah, also like I held a lot of conversations with people who were like, so what's like California like, or what's like what is the states like? So I think I would encourage maybe like students or whoever wants, if anybody's seeking to travel to the states, I maybe somewhere like mid or like the Midwest or somewhere that's very outside of what the beach town is like. It's very beachy. It's very tropical. But I think, yeah, I would, if, yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
We had another question where someone asked, when did you all apply for your program? Was it your first, second, or last year? Or when do you recommend applying to study away?
Yeah, I applied my third year. Yeah, I applied January of my third year, so like that was around winter quarter. I went the summer after my third year, transitioning into my fourth year. Yeah, again, because I kind of, it was very like on the spot, on the moment. I kind of just went with it, and I was just like, I have the time and I have the year, and I was already thinking of a fifth year. So it just worked out well for me.
So I actually transferred to UCLA from community college. So when I applied to the program, I think I was on my third year because I did take an extra year even after transferring. So one of the things that I wish I would have done, I guess, is apply sooner because I really wanted just more. I wanted to travel more. And that's why, again, as soon as I got back, I did a lot of like traveling just within the States because once you get that first trip in, you're just like, oh, this is really fun. And it's a lot of hard work, but it's worth it. So the sooner the better, and definitely talk to your counselor, talk to just seek out resources so you can make sure that your classes can align with your traveling plan.
I didn't actually start going to info sessions and talking to the EAP office until late in my second year, and I started the application process for the Study Abroad to Mexico program my third year. And at that time, that timing felt right to me because I was declared, and I also found a program that aligned not only to my personal interests, but also kind of my research, my academic interests too. For me, the way my 4-year plan, or it ended up being a 5-year plan, but the way my plan aligned, I was able to insert a program my third year, and it would have flowed perfectly. Of course, I kind of had to do a lot of maneuvering, and ended up going to the programs the summer and the fall of my 5th year. So not to say there's anything that's too late, but whenever you are confident that the placement of your program won't alter or won't leave any major class in limbo. Like, for example, to reveal a little bit about my preparedness, I still had to do my senior seminar when I came back. So, in Santa Cruz, there's huge wait lists, and I really had to reach out and say, hey, this is my last quarter, please let me in. So if you could avoid that frustration and scare, I would definitely avoid it.
Thank you. And then we have one other question. If you experience homesickness, and in those moments of homesickness or being the other, how are you able to cope in those situations?
So I think I was in Thailand for a month. I want to say month, a few weeks. I don't remember, but I surprisingly, I like to describe myself being very like homebody, very close to my family. But I think I was just having the best time of my life in Thailand. That for me, a phone call was enough, and there was that time difference. So I definitely had to like schedule certain calls with like my family, my loved ones. But if I did ever feel homesick or if I just felt overwhelmed, I didn't really have anybody like a family member to reach out to. I relied on my roommates and on the other UC students that were there. And again, I was very fortunate that in my cohort, there was 3 of us who were undocumented. And so we oftentimes would sit down and just kind of just check in with each other. And overall, everyone in the group like knew about our status, but they never treated us differently. And so I think that's what really helped just make the trip even better. Because, nobody really likes to feel like the other, but it is, it's something that you can't hide. And so I just learned to kind of like embrace it and enjoy my time.
I can kind of relate. I also was, just ready to go as far away from home as possible and, just ready to take it all in. But I did end up feeling a little bit homesick for both of my programs. Sometimes it was just, before I even left the dorm, I said, hey, I'm still here in New York. I'm still in DC, and it just kind of kicked in for the 20th time that I'm so far away. And part of it was, like, my monetary worries or my, worries about my status, like, wow, anything really can happen. But, at the end of the day, I just kind of really, processed as best as I could. And I would call my mom or my dad and just tell them how I'm feeling. And they would kind of help ground me a little bit. They'd say, well, you can't, grab a quick taco there, but what can you do? And I'd say, well, there's a little Caribbean spot right down the block. Like, we'll try it. So they'd kind of help ground me. So my parents were really great at helping ease kind of those feelings of homesickness. And I definitely felt other or like the other, I should say, especially in right in the central parts of New York and DC. And something that I feel is not talked about, or at least wasn't a conversation that I engaged in enough before I left, was how in California, I am part of probably, I believe now Latinx groups are the numerical majority. So that feeling of otherness was really not something I was familiar with until I came to the East Coast, and it was just a huge huge learning experience that I'm very grateful. The best you can do is just learn, really soak in those feelings, and I really had to dig deep and say, well, it's not an uncomfortable feeling, it's just a different feeling. And, really do my best to learn the history of the ground I'm standing in and how it came to be what it is. And now I see that feeling of otherness as something really beautiful. Like, wow, like I'm really out here, my life map has really brought me all the way out here. So it's really, I consider it a really amazing feeling now.
Thank you for everyone who saved these extra 23 minutes, especially thank you to our panelists. We know time is valuable, and we just appreciate you so much. We appreciate all you attendees who joined us today, and you will hear from us very soon with, again, a copy of the presentation, slides, and recording. And of course, if any questions do come up, please send them to us, and if we can, I'll route them to our panelists or try to answer them as best as we can. But everyone, enjoy your night, and thank you so much again. Bye.